Video games can have some truly epic stories that mediums such as movies or TV shows can't replicate. For some games, the story of how it got made can be more interesting than the game itself. One game that has a legendary story both in and out of the game is Final Fantasy XV. With it being released back in 2016 and a new title on the horizon, I thought this would be the best time for a little retrospective. So what makes this Final Fantasy XV recap video so special? Well, I'm dressed like Prince Noctis. I didn't have an actual fingerless glove, so I made my own. Whenever I hear Final Fantasy XV talked about these days, it's usually in a negative light, which is kind of sad for me because this is actually one of my favorite games, at least of the PS4 era. So I figured with Final Fantasy XVI on the horizon, now would be as good a time as ever to talk about Final Fantasy XV, and there's a lot to talk about here. So before I talk about the actual game proper, it'd be killer if you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell as well for notifications on future videos. And let's start with the beginning of Final Fantasy XV way back in 2006. It's impossible to talk about Final Fantasy XV without bringing up its long and troubled history, and its relationship with other Square titles. And better grab some root beer and some cup noodles, there's a lot to unpack here. 15 is infamous for being stuck in development limbo from 2006 until 2016. To put that into perspective, Versus 13 was announced while I was entering my final year of middle school. 15 released in November 2016, well after I graduated from college. That long! 15 was first announced in 2006 under the name Final Fantasy Versus 13 as a PlayStation 3 exclusive, along with Final Fantasy 13 and Final Fantasy Agito 13. These three games were to be a part of the Fabula Nova Crystallis subseries of Final Fantasy. Square really wanted to flex that Latin 101 credit, didn't they? They weren't direct sequels to each other, but a part of a shared universe. Additionally, all titles were going to be made using the same engine, the Crystal Tools engine, that would have powered Square Enix's games during the 7th generation. Spoiler alert, you'll notice a recurring pattern with Square's management in this video. Each game was a part of the same universe, but was open for each team to interpret the Fabula Nova series in their own way. For example, 13 was supposed to be on the bright side of things, whereas Versus 13, under director Tetsuya Nomura, was going to be darker in tone. And given how popular gaming got during the 6th generation, having a new universe to introduce your franchise for a new generation wasn't a bad idea, but things are never that easy. Things during the 7th generation started off on the wrong foot. A reason behind this was that the development for 13 and Versus 13 were being made for the PlayStation 3, which wasn't out yet when the series was announced. Square wanted to use the Crystal Tools engine for their 7th gen games. A good idea in theory, but in practice it was a massive headache. In fact, only so many games use the Crystal Tools engine. The PS3 itself was a difficult system to develop for, so Square had a hard time getting the Crystal Tools engine to work on the system in the first place. Issues with the engine led to some staff from Versus 13 helping out with the engine in 13 proper, which of course meant delays for Versus 13. 13 itself also had a lack of direction, with the E3 2006 trailer basically being a proof of concept video. 13 also got announced as a multi-platform game, which came as a huge shock back then. I imagine the additional platform support didn't help development. Thankfully, 13 would see the light of day in 2010, to good sales and scores, and would lead to 2 direct sequels for the 13 story. So that's one part of the Fabula Nova series down, 2 to go. The second game, Agito 13, was thought to be vaporware, as news went quiet after E3 2006. It turns out the team behind Agito were also working on Crisis Core,
Me? Gungaga.
and The Third Birthday, the Parasite Eve game that killed that series. Thankfully, development would start in earnest after those titles released. Agito eventually came out on the PSP in 2011 as Type 0 as a Japan exclusive. Hajime Tabata directed Type 0, and after the name change, it downplayed its relationship with the Fabula Nova series. Type 0 seemed to be a success in Japan, but nothing really came of the sub-series. A sub-series within a sub-series, that's a lot of subs. There was a mobile game called Final Fantasy Agito that was released in Japan, but is now offline, and the ports for Windows and the Vita got cancelled. Anything else in the Type 0 universe that was planned didn't see the light of day. On the upside, Type 0 did get a localized release in 2015 as Type 0 HD, complete with a demo of 15. With 13 released and Agito released as Type 0, the final piece of the puzzle is Versus 13. Contrary to popular belief, Versus 13 was not in full production during the development of 13 and Type 0. Staff who were working on Versus 13 were also being called to work on 13 proper, and as mentioned, the planned Crystal Tools engine was giving Square issues, especially for a game as big as Versus 13. Trailers for Versus 13 would pop up here and there to keep the hype alive. The only gameplay shown of Versus 13 was shown at Tokyo Game Show 2010. As can be seen from the footage under Versus 13, the seeds were planted for what would become 15. The protagonist, named Noctis, more or less kept his design consistent throughout development. There was always an empire under fire, he got 3 friends to tag along for the ride, and to an extent they kept their final designs throughout development throughout the game. And Noctis always kept his ability to summon weapons out of nowhere. That was always really cool to me. And the Tokyo Game Show 2010 trailer showed that the gameplay was starting to take shape too. Versus 13 had the ambition of being an open-world action game, as that was the style at the time. It also seemed to take a lot from Nomura's Kingdom Hearts, being an action game with CPU allies. Of course, not all things from Versus 13 were brought over for 15. For one, Versus 13 was supposed to be a far darker game than 13 proper. Noctis' crew were modeled after Yakuza. Not the game, but actual Yakuza. In fact, there was going to be more of a gangland feel to the story. Noctis would also actually be in the invasion of his kingdom, instead of being away from the kingdom near the beginning of the game. The biggest change from Versus 13 was a character named Stella, who was shaping up to be both a rival and a potential love interest for Noctis. How her relationship with Noctis would have evolved is a mystery, as she was cut in favor of Luna Freya in the final game. There was enough information to get fans excited, especially with 13 and Type 0 finally releasing. Full production on Versus 13 did start in 2011, but the Crystal Tools engine just could not handle a big game like Versus 13. Development on the game would stall out at around 25% completion. For the public, news for Versus 13 would go cold after January 2011. Before changes within Square happened, there was a chance for a Western studio to make a Final Fantasy game sometime during 2012. Eidos Montreal had a proposal for a new Final Fantasy game that would have been a space opera, possibly influenced by the Mass Effect games and Eidos' own Deus Ex series. Then Square CEO Yoichi Wada did give them his blessing to make the game under the codename Project W. Development went on for about a year, but then was quietly cancelled. Eidos Montreal would instead make Deus Ex Mankind Divided, which was a success but had a ton of issues from the western side of Square Enix. Every now and again, I would hear about a new Final Fantasy game and wonder what happened to that mysterious Versus 13 title I heard about so many years ago. Behind the scenes, the gears would finally start moving. Square got a look at the Xbox One and PS4 behind closed doors, and realized that Versus 13 would be seen as dated if it released on the PlayStation 3 as intended. While development on the PS3 did briefly continue, that version was cancelled in favor of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Square also decided that Versus 13 would be the next mainline game in the series as Final Fantasy XV. And apparently around this time, 15 was proposed to be a musical after Tetsuya Nomura saw Les Miserables. Now I wonder how that would have turned out. I guess you could say Square really turned off the dark on that one. With Versus 13 stuck in limbo for about 7 years at that point, then CEO Yoichi Wada put the blame on Nomura for all the development issues and had Hajime Tabata direct 15. The development team would be Square Enix Business Division 2 and Luminous Productions, and the title would be developed on the new Luminous engine. Nomura-san would go on to direct Kingdom Hearts 3, a game that was also in development hell due to Square Enix forcing the team to change engines midway through production, and Disney and Pixar taking their sweet time to get back to Nomura for approvals. Nomura also directed Final Fantasy VII Remake, a game that he didn't know he was going to direct until Square announced it, and a game that changed development studios during production. I have a feeling that Square Enix might be ran by a bunch of idiots. Even with Tabata directing and a new engine in mind, things were still a mess internally. Square in general was a hot mess during this time, with games being announced and going into limbo, their Western games being meddled with, and them still not making a sequel to Ehrgeiz God Bless the Ring. Square's internal issues could be felt in 15, as the game had to be out before the end of 2016. Versus 13 didn't have the best reputation within the company, so it took about 6 months for Tabata to get everybody on the same page for 15. The team's internal structure was also changed to be more horizontal, as in a non-hierarchical structure to help things out. I couldn't say that word properly, sorry. Some liked the style of development, others didn't. Many things were cut or altered from Versus 13 to fit Tabata's 15, to the point where they are considered different games within Square Enix. The main characters and general open-world gameplay was kept, but many of the story beats, themes, and characters were changed or cut. Even the basic gameplay was constantly changed. The writing team also had a hard time with the script, with internal reports saying that the script for 15 was being altered months before release. I can imagine Square wanted the game out before 2017, as early 2017 was stacked with big releases, particularly in the West. And just for the fun of it, 15 had a last-minute delay in September 2016. After 10 years of uncertainty, Final Fantasy XV would launch in November 2016, and launched to rave reviews and high sales. And unlike The Last Guardian, Final Fantasy XV was actually worth the wait. So with that backstory out of the way, well, now it's time to talk about the game proper. Before 15 launched, I wasn't too much into the Final Fantasy series, partly because I never had any systems that had them, and partially because of people gassing up the games to the point where I just didn't want to play them out of spite. With me getting into RPGs more in my college years and the sheer excitement around 15 finally releasing, I just had to try it. And I had to say, I really liked 15, to the point where some friends and I cosplayed as the main characters. I remember the talk around 15 at the time being positive. The complaints were mostly the same, which we'll get to later, but most people seemed to like 15. It was the first mainline Final Fantasy game to launch on 8th gen systems, so a lot of people were excited to see what the series was about. I personally think that 15 was the game that helped save JRPGs in the mainstream. During the 7th generation of games, RPGs fell from the mainstream because of 13, which was a success, but people thought it was a bit too linear for its own good. Most RPGs released during that era were either niche or relegated to handhelds, with a few standouts. Additionally, Final Fantasy XIV launched in 2010, and it was bad, to the point where it nearly killed Square. Thankfully, A Realm Reborn saved that title, giving Square a cash cow and strengthening the Final Fantasy brand. Coming out with 15 after A Realm Reborn and making 15 more accessible for newcomers was a smart move. And it seemed to work, with 15 being a huge success for Square, and Square making many RPGs for years to come. A few things. For one, this is the Royale Edition being played on the PS5. Second, I'm not going to go over every single thing that happens in the plot, just some highlights I want to talk about, so there will be some minor spoilers throughout the video. Third, I did have a hard time saying some of the more flowery names in this game. Apologies in advance for any mispronunciations. But if I did say something wrong, people will let me know in the comments. It's good engagement. 15 takes place in the land of Eos, which is occupied by a few kingdoms. The protagonist, Noctis, is the prince of the kingdom Lucius. Lucius has been at war with the kingdom of Niflheim, and the two kingdoms are attempting to bring peace with a treaty. However, Niflheim breaks the treaty and invades the central kingdom of Lucius, killing Noctis' father, King Regis. Noctis, along with his friends, must travel the land of Eos to gather the royal arms, do battle with the gods of Eos, reunite with the Oracle and Noctis' fiancée, Lady Lunafreya, and stop the Niflheim Empire from plunging Eos into an endless night. The plot was a bit of a point of contention for people at the time. While the setup is fine, the issue comes from there being a lot of lore and context needed for the game that was relegated to side material. Thankfully, the characters and core gameplay were strong enough to keep me going throughout 15, though I will say the plot was definitely a mess. One of the main issues of 13 was the main party, with Lightning being seen as a boring female Cloud who appeals to armpit guys. The other members of 13 weren't much better. 15 has one of my favorite main parties in an RPG. The protagonist Noctis is a young prince who is sent off from his kingdom to marry his love Lunafreya. He's accompanied by his three friends, Gladius, the muscle of the group and who is from a line of royal guards. Ignis is the caretaker and brains and the cook of the team. Finally, there's Prompto, Noctis' best friend from school who likes taking photos. From the get-go, you can get a feel for each character and their personalities. They bicker and bond much like real friends, and each character goes through a lot of growth. By the end of the title, you do get attached to them like they are your brothers. Noctis does get some hate for being another Final Fantasy pretty boy with an emo look. Those people clearly didn't play 15. Noctis has a lot of personality, like his fun obsession with fishing, his awkward posing for photos, and general distaste for vegetables. If he wasn't royalty, and, you know, a video game character, he seems like the kind of guy you have met in high school who just spends his free time fishing and gaming and barely passed physics. Also, it's just nice having a Final Fantasy hero wearing a fit that isn't totally garish. That said, you can wear a mariachi outfit and ruin the moment by dressing like you just shopped at the biggest tourist trap ever. Any game with a mariachi outfit and it is a winner in my book, so I guess that means that the next Final Fantasy title should take place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and have Bryan Cranston voice the main character. That would be pretty cool! The side characters are also a lot of fun. Core is a badass mentor, Iris is Gladio's sister who is cute as a button and has an adorable crush on Noctis, and Aranea is a mysterious fighter who's both friend and foe. You see, she plays both sides, so she always comes out on top. She has great chemistry with the main crew and she also has really big tits. There's a glitch that can keep her in the main party, and she has unique dialogue and interactions with the main crew. Either Square planned to keep her in the main party for longer, or they knew people would want her in the main party. Hard to tell. There's also Kenny Crow, and well... that about sums it up. Another complaint 13 had was its linearity. Tabata clearly didn't want that happening again. The world of EOS is huge with lots of stuff to do. While the opening does take a while to get going, hell, the first scene of the game is a flash forward for like 2 minutes that goes nowhere. Then there's the emotional send-off from King Regis to Noctis, then the car gets broken, and then the game starts. Thankfully, getting to the fun stuff doesn't take too long. It's not like Skyward Sword levels of early game slowness. From Chapter 3 onwards, it's basically go anywhere and do anything. Some of my favorite games are the kinds of games where you can just go around and do whatever you want to do, explore the world at your own pace. So 15 was right up my alley. I spent so much time just driving around the world and doing bounty hunts because they are a great source of money and experience, and just an excuse to see more of the world. The core combat is also a lot of fun, being an action RPG where you get a lot of weapons to use and 3 CPU partners to help out in battle. For the most part, Prompto tends to get killed more often than not. Some people think that 15 is just a button-mashing action game. While I wouldn't say the combat is Ninja Gaiden levels of deep, there is a bit more here. The theme of 15 is teamwork. If you can learn the enemy patterns, manage your resources, and coordinate with your team, you can dance around your opponents. After a bit of practice, I could take on enemies about 10 levels higher than me. There's other people out there who hate the fact that Final Fantasy abandoned turn-based gameplay, period. For the game that 15 is, the combat works great. And if you want that classic turn-based combat, you have plenty of other options out there. While the main gameplay is very fun, it can get repetitive, especially when Imperial assholes invade you while you're trying to hunt. In-game, they are sometimes called NIFs, which sounds like a racial slur. A mark of a good open-world game is having side activities that are fun to do, to cleanse the palate. Each of the 4 characters have a special skill you can level up. You can take photos with Prompto, you can camp with Gladio, and you can also train with him too. You can also cook with Ignis at camp, which leads to this immortal line.
That's it! I've come up with a new recipe!
And of course, what AAA game wouldn't be complete without fishing? Much like real fishing, it's for rednecks, but it is a fun waste of time. There's actually enough content here to be its own game, which eventually did happen. I'm now realizing some of the greatest games of all time have fishing minigames in them, so if you want your game to have critical acclaim, well, I guess you now know the winning formula. Even people who hate this game would have to admit 15 looks and sounds amazing. For the most part, the characters can look kinda weird at times. The world of EOS is beautiful and it looks like something I am able to reach out and touch. I would often put the car in auto mode just to see the world and admire its beauty from the car side. I love the blending of real-world tech and fantasy elements. That's why this game was called a fantasy based in reality. Would have been nice to explore the city in the beginning of the game though. The CG movies also look fantastic. I thought I was just watching a real movie. I mean, there was a Final Fantasy XV movie, but that's a different topic. It's amazing how far we've come from the CG cutscenes of old to basically playing a movie. Leave a comment if you want Ryan Gosling and Eric Andre in Final Fantasy XVII. The music was done by the legendary Yoko Shimomura. To this day, I still listen to the OST on Spotify because it's so beautiful. You can even get a radio in the game to listen to your favorite Final Fantasy tunes while on the road or exploring. The voice acting is also top-notch. Ray Chase is the perfect voice for Noctis, and he can really land those emotional moments well. Everybody else brings their A game, especially in the Cup Noodles episode where it sounds like the crew is trying their hardest not to crack up laughing. Cup Noodles, I'm really eating the princely diet here. Darren DePaul plays the villain Arden, and he was having the time of his life with this role.
Rush off to slay the Hydrian for your poor sister's sake.
Upon a second playthrough, I realized there were a lot of tone issues with the plot. Not surprising when finding out that the script is being edited months before release. For example, at the end of Chapter 2, the Kingdom of Insomnia is invaded, King Regis is dead, and who knows how many people got out of the kingdom alive. Meanwhile, the Choco Bros are doing things like hunting, or fishing, or taking photos, or doing an ad for Cup Noodles. Then after Chapter 9, it's nothing but trauma for Noctis until the end of the game. I hope Cup Noodles can survive the apocalypse. One of the biggest changes from Versus 13 to 15 was the character Stella being replaced by Luna Freya. Stella was shaping up to be both a rival and love interest to Noctis, and that is an idea that could have led to something unique. Tabata replaced Stella for Luna Freya, and sadly she doesn't get as much screen time as she deserved. She's more of a plot device for Noctis to marry than an actual character. When she is on screen, she makes it count. It's just that I wish we got more of her. The biggest point of contention is after Chapter 9. What started as an open world adventure turned into a very railroaded experience, which is the opposite issue of 13. During Chapter 9, you travel to a town that's surrounded by water, which has a really cool style. There's not much to do on the island city, sadly. However, there is a section where Noctis and a politician have a debate, and you can choose Noctis' answers. It makes you feel like, you know, a real politician, minus the scandals and lawsuits and hush money and other words that will make me get demonetized. Though, let's be real, if a water god was attacking America, many of the politicians, especially from the South, would be focused on things like, I don't know, drag shows and banning books instead of, you know, dealing with the actual water god. If you've ever seen Shin Godzilla, that's how things would be like in the real world. Then Noctis fights the water god Leviathan in what's a replica of the perfect chaos fight from Sonic Adventure. Then after the fight, the plot takes a sharp turn, going from a lighthearted road trip with the boys to having to face your own destiny and a world slowly facing ruin. At this point, there was supposed to be tension added to the main cast, but it doesn't quite land for me. Noctis gets put into a coma, Ignis gets blinded, and Gladio really turns up his jerk quality here. He calls out Noctis for whining about the stuff that has happened to him, that he's being selfish and not fulfilling his duty as king. There is a debate here about grieving and how you tackle it. It just wasn't handled as well as it could have been. The voice acting helps sell the scenes, I just wish the writing was better. Thankfully, after Chapter 10, Noctis and Gladio patch things up. The gameplay also takes a hit from Chapter 10 onwards, going from an open world with plenty to see and do to a linear experience until the end. At some point in the game, railroading is going to have to happen if you want to tell a story. It's just that the change came very abruptly and a little over halfway into the game, rather than the last couple of hours. While the combat is still as fun as ever, it takes a considerable nosedive in Chapter 13. Noctis is separated from his friends and he's without his weapons. So guess what, that means you get a long stealth section, and I do mean long, with Arden doing his best job at annoying the heck out of you the whole time. Name me one action game where a stealth level was fun. You can't! Stop doing this, developers! Even people who love 15 admit this is the worst part of the game. Then it ends with a time skip like many shonen anime. Hey, would you look at that? We have a time skip here too, and I gotta say I'm looking a little sharp here. Anyway, I'm gonna start talking about the final chapter of Final Fantasy XV, so if you don't want to get spoiled, well, here's your warning. Spoiler alert, spoiler alert, and spoiler alert. And here we go. Arden reveals his grand plan to put the world in eternal darkness and get revenge on the royal bloodline. To stop him, Noctis has to be absorbed into a crystal to gain power. Gain power for 10 years. And 10 years pass and Noctis awakens looking suspiciously like John Wick. Let's be real, if you're a man in his mid-30s who can still grow his hair long, you're either going to have a really bad action mullet, or you're going to look like Keanu Reeves. There's only two choices for you at this point. One complaint about Vanilla 15 was Chapter 14 being a waste of a good idea. The world is in ruins, and the only thing the gang could do is reunite one more time to defeat Arden and stop the Endless Night. Originally, there wasn't much to do in Chapter 14 besides just head straight for Arden in the ruins of Insomnia and maybe fight some tough demons. Royal Edition really expanded the world of Ruin with some extra missions, more cutscenes, and more boss fights that gave each of the bros some shine. And hey, you can explore Insomnia after all this time. A ruined Insomnia, but still. After cleaning up house, all that's left is a final duel with Arden. It's a cool boss as it's just Noctis and Arden in a final drag-out duel to the death. Noctis sacrifices himself to eliminate Arden and bring light to the world once more. When I cleared 15 for the first time, my reaction to the ending was...
What the hell was that?
Originally, the ending had the bros fighting an endless wave of demons, but in Royale it's clear that they survive the night and rebuild the world while Noctis is reunited with Luna Freya. And yeah, some tears were shed during the mid-credits cutscenes.
It's more than I can take.
We went on this long journey learning about our bloodline, traveling the world, bonding with our friends, and it just kind of ended. Like I said, the script was being altered up until months before release, so it makes sense that the ending would get the shaft. I think I can say for most people that the ending took the wind out of our sails. Or at least so we thought. So there's my look at the base game of Final Fantasy XV finished, and I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, the plot was a bit sloppy at places. Yeah, there were some ideas there that weren't quite capitalized on, and the ending was definitely a bummer. But for me, the characters, the gameplay, and the world of EOS definitely held up this title. For me, the positives far outweigh the negatives, and it was all about the journey, not so much the destination. Whenever I see people talk about Final Fantasy XV these days, it's usually how much of a disappointment it was, and I can kind of understand why, but for me, I really love this game. I had a lot of fun replaying it for this video. Also, big ups to you, Square Enix, for including a chapter select in your game. That makes replaying the best parts all the easier for me. When Final Fantasy XV released, DLC for your games has become basically a standard practice for every major AAA game, and Square Enix decided to make a lot of DLC for Final Fantasy XV, so how are they? Well, let's take a look. What modern-day AAA game isn't complete without a Season Pass? In 15, each of the main characters leaves the main party temporarily for whatever reason, so the DLC focuses on what Gladio, Prompto, and Ignis were doing during their absences. And in a unique turn, each DLC takes on a different genre. Gladio is a manly man, so his style is more of a hack and slasher. Prompto is a gunslinger, so he has more of an MGS stealth and third-person shooter style feel. And Ignis is more or less like the base game at 15. I didn't play any of the DLC when they came out, so this is all new territory for me. The variety in gameplay is nice to give you a bit of a palate cleanser. It was also nice to know more about the main characters, why they act the way they do, and why they are so devoted to Noctis. That said, the writing can be a bit uneven here too. Like in Gladio's story, there's more focus on Core, someone who we saw just enough of in the main story and got a good idea of how his character is. It's like they wanted it to be a Core story, but realized that they needed to make it more about Gladio. I think the one story that should be played is Ignis's. It shows what happened after the Leviathan hit in Chapter 9, and how he lost his sight. That's fine and dandy, but it's clear that there are more stakes here than in the other DLC. Ignis is devoted to Noctis more than anything else, to the point where he is willing to sacrifice the whole world just so Noctis doesn't die. I wish there was more explanation to Iggy's devotion, like if his family's duty was to protect the king and their lineage, kind of like Impa from Zelda. And Iggy rewrites the whole story so that Noctis, Arden, and Lunafreya don't die and he doesn't go blind. It's nice to have a happy ending, even if it was a stretch to get there. The final main DLC was Episode Arden, which sadly wasn't included in the Royal Edition, so I had to watch a playthrough. It explains his backstory and how he became such a bastard in 15. I don't know how I feel about that. I liked Arden being a smug jerk for the sake of being a smug jerk, and revenge. That's all you really need for a good villain. Basically, Arden is the brother of King Somnus, making him related to Noctis and Regis by 2,000 years ago. Back then, Arden tried to stop the Star Scourge by absorbing the stuff and becoming a monster rejected by family and gods alike. Somnus betrayed Arden as Arden was supposed to be the true founder king and protector of the crystal. After watching his chapter, there's a good reason why Arden became a villain. It would have been cool if all of his backstory was discovered in-game, but it is cool to play as the bad guy for a change. Oh yeah, there was the multiplayer mode, Comrades. Gonna be real? Had no idea this mode existed until now, and I have no one to play it with, and I don't feel like deleting stuff on my PS5 to play it. I'm sure there's a Discord where I can find people to play with, but I am too lazy to do that. So this is my first time actually playing the DLC for Final Fantasy XV, and I do have to agree, the DLC feels really disjointed. It's like someone from up top at Square Enix wanted DLC for 15, but the team behind 15 was like, we weren't planning to have DLC, so just gotta make something really fast. I will say though, it feels like nothing was cut out from the main game just to make the DLC. Maybe that wasn't the case, I don't know, but I'm glad I played it, and again, it's nice spending time with these characters I like so much. If there's one thing Square Enix is good at, it is making a lot of merchandise for their games, and well, they definitely did that for Final Fantasy XV. If there's one thing Square has been trying to replicate over the years, it's been the multimedia success of 7. With the large amount of hype around 15, as well as the second wind of 14 after A Realm Reborn, Square went ham with 15 media. There was the animated movie, Kingsglaive, which was meant to be a prequel to 15 proper. It did have a small theatrical release and had some big names in it like Aaron Paul, Sean Bean, and Lena Headey in it. Or is it Lena Headey? Kingsglaive isn't regarded as the best movie out there, especially without the context of 15. Still, the fights, the CG, and music hold it up. There are some ideas in the movie that were supposed to be in the final game of 15 and in Versus 13, so that's cool. There was another animated series released online called Brotherhood Final Fantasy XV, which follows the main crew before the events of the main game. And just because the main game wasn't finished didn't mean that Square wasn't going to stop making spin-off games. There was a pre-order bonus from GameStop called Kingsdale, which was a free-to-play beat-em-up game. The in-game games the crew plays, King's Knight and Justice Monsters 5, were also available to download in certain regions. So you could play a game, that's from a game, that's a game within that game. That just blows your mind, doesn't it? There was also a VR fishing spin-off called Monsters of the Deep. Given that VR was popping off at the time that 15 released, a fishing spin-off for VR wasn't a bad idea. There were 2 mobile games, A New Empire and War of Eos, which I guess were big hits. War of Eos must still have a lot of players, as the official Twitter for the game is still being updated. There was also a demake of 15 called Pocket Edition, which has this weird art style, and was also available for mobile phones and consoles. So if you really wanted to, you could have 2 versions of 15 on your system of choice unless you played on the Switch, in which case you were just stuck with Pocket Edition. Why would you play Pocket Edition when you could get the real 15 unless the real 15 is too scary for you, and you wanted to see Gladio with a Ruined, but there was also an updated version of 15 that had all the DLC in it called Royal Edition, which was released for PC and consoles. And 15 got a port to the Stadia.
Oh wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
And there were crossovers. Within 15 proper, there were special events for Final Fantasy XIV, the mobile game Terror Wars. I never heard of Terror Wars until now, and that game is dead, so that mission is completely pointless. Assassin's Creed of all things got a Chapter 2. Apparently Assassin's Creed exists within the world of EOS. Why not have a celebration for a good game like, I don't know, Radiant Silvergun Day or something? Thankfully these events were free, so you really couldn't complain about them. That said, I do not want to live in a place where there's a holiday called the Assassin's Festival. The car, the Regalia, appeared in Forza as DLC, so that's cool. There was Japanese exclusive DLC for Blue Reflection of all things, an appearance in Nier Automata which just made things more depressing, and Minecraft DLC. I'm not much of a Minecraft guy, sorry. Noctis himself would make his fighting game debut in Tekken 7. There were rumors that Noctis was supposed to appear in Soul Calibur 6 instead, but Namco only had so much time to use Noctis, so they opted to use him in Tekken. There were also rumors of Noctis joining the then in development Smash Ultimate, but sadly that didn't happen. That said, his voice actor Ray Chase does voice Roy in Ultimate. Anyway, back to Tekken. As of Tekken 7, the universes of Street Fighter, Fatal Fury, Final Fantasy XV, and The Walking Dead are all canon within Tekken, and you thought Kingdom Hearts had a stupid plot. And what a way to date Tekken 7, Noctis and Negan as guest characters. So who fumbled the bag worse, The Walking Dead or Game of Thrones? I wasn't into either show, but I just heard how both of those shows ended on lousy notes. I didn't even know that The Walking Dead ended until well after the fact. And speaking of fumbling the bag, let's, just watch the video. By the second half of 2018, we've gotten the chapters for the main party, plus some other DLC bonuses, plus 15 characters appearing in other titles, plus the Royal Edition to help new players get into the title. So what was next for 15? Come November 2018, on a livestream, it was announced that 3 of the 4 planned DLC chapters for Aranea, Lunafreya, and Noctis were cancelled. What a way to cancel your live service, by announcing its death on an anniversary stream. That's like telling your spouse you cheated on them with a Roppongi hoe on your anniversary. Needless to say, this came as a huge shock for the fans who stuck with the DLC chapters. The only thing that would be worked on would be the then in development Ardent chapter, which ended up being the last DLC for 15. When the dust settled, it was found that Square lost 33 million yen on a project within Luminous Studios. From the outside looking in, it seems that Square was setting up Hajime Tabata to be the fall guy for the studio. Though in an interview, Tabata-san said that he was more or less burnt out on 15 and wanted to do something different. It sounded like he was shoved upon an unpopular project and had to make it work. And of course, tons of issues at Square to deal with. Current Square CEO Yosuke Masuda wanted to move on from the world of Final Fantasy XV in favor of 7 Remake anyway. He just expedited the process. Without 15's director, episode Ardent would be released in March 2019, ending the post-game support for 15. I think the biggest flaw of 15 was trying to go into the live service direction. The thing about live service games is that the core game needs to be worthy of a purchase in the first place and having players constantly coming back for more. While the full game of 15 is a complete experience, I can imagine many longtime Final Fantasy fans being burnt out on the game after the initial ending, and I'm not too sure about how many new players felt about the game either. I personally was burnt out at the time. And then there were the fans who just didn't think 15 was a good game in the first place. And this is pure speculation on my end. I can imagine all the time and money being put into the DLC chapters wasn't turning a profit, Maybe if they made like a 15-2 that tied the DLC chapters together, that could have been something. Alas, what could have been. So you think that's where the 15 story would end, but not quite. Square announced that the stories for Aranea, Lunafreya, and Noctis would be wrapped up in a novel called Dawn of the Future. Whatever was planned for those 3 chapters were wrapped up in the novel. It is nice to see those ideas from the game realized in some form, but I don't want to read. I just read the ending, and the novel went out of its way to fix the bittersweet ending of the original 15. Basically, there's an alternate continuity where Lunafreya didn't die in Chapter 9, and she tries to make an alliance with Arden to stop Bahamut, the real big bad of 15. Noctis, with the help of the Astrals, defeats Bahamut while Arden gets erased from existence. Thankfully for Arden, he's reunited with his fiancée Era in the afterlife. Noctis and Lunafreya are wed, and the Chocobros work together to help humanity flourish again on Eos. Like I said, it is nice to see the ideas for the DLC come out in some form, but I think I speak for everybody when I say I would rather have played this than read it. In the aftermath of 15, Square put their focus into other projects. Some were amazing, others were downright terrible. Nomura-san headed both Kingdom Hearts 3 and Final Fantasy VII Remake, and both of those games had their issues, but both games were critical and commercial successes. It seems like Nomura was somewhat bitter about what happened with Versus 13's development, as some stuff that was in that title seems to be taking shape in the Kingdom Hearts universe. There's a character introduced in 3 as Yozora who seems like a cross between Noctis and Riku. Yozora is royalty who can summon weapons out of nowhere, just like Noctis. And without wishing to spoil anything, some cutscenes that were shown in Versus 13 trailers were referenced in Remind, so maybe we'll see Nomura's Versus 13 reimagined in Kingdom Hearts 4, whenever that releases. The Final Fantasy brand kept as strong as ever, with 14 in particular being the biggest MMO ever, dethroning World of Warcraft. 7 Remake was a big hit for Square too, coming out right during the pandemic and making Tifa an honorary member of the Italian Senate. Stranger of Paradise also released in 2022, and low-key is one of the best Final Fantasy games. I don't care what anyone says, Final Fantasy plus Neo plus New Metal plus everything cringe about the late 90s and early 2000s equals awesome.
This desperate urge to eradicate chaos come from? Chaos takes hold. Me? Chaos? Chaos. This world needs chaos!
As for Tabata, he created the company JP Games and made the mobile game The Pegasus Dream Tour for the Olympic 2020 Para Games. As for Luminous Productions, they made one more game called Forspoken, announced in March 2021 and released in January 2023, and well...
I'll probably fly next.
Now you're just being ridiculous.
Oh, that's too far. Good to know there's a line.
If you could just master these new abilities, with my help, of course.
Did you not just see me take out that gnarly beast?
Forspoken was a bomb for Square Enix, and they quickly announced the shuttering of Luminous Productions. What an absolute fall from grace. It's the story you want to hear. A game comes out against all odds and becomes regarded as one of the best games of all time. A landmark title not only for the Final Fantasy series, but for gaming as a whole. 15 was getting there, but with the amount of time spent working on 15, the amount of internal issues within the production team and Square Enix itself, the bottom just fell out and we're left with essentially an incomplete game. I feel like Tabata and Nomura get too much heat for what happened with 15. They aren't entirely blameless, but majority of 15's issues lie on management. With that said, I think 15 is a great game that is worthy of the Final Fantasy title. I had a lot of fun revisiting this game with the characters I came to really like. I just wanted to see the payoff a title like 15 should have had. At least the story ended with Dawn of the Future instead of just not ending at all. And hey, we can always hang out with the Chocobros again in the mobile game War of Eos. Joy. I can only imagine what the final 3 episodes of Final Fantasy XV would have been like. It could have been amazing, it could have been mid, but it would have been better than a damn novel and a mobile game. I guess the tale of 15 is that it's all about the journey, not the destination. And what a journey it's been. I will always remember my time with Noctis, Prompto, Ignis, and Gladius, and hopefully we can see each other again in a new realm. And with that, the ultimate Final Fantasy XV retrospective is complete, and I hope you enjoyed it. I honestly believe had Final Fantasy XV been seen to completion, it would have been seen as an honest-to-goodness masterpiece. It's just that there's too much time and money put into the project, too many issues at Square Enix, and the bottom just fell through, and we're left with essentially an incomplete product. Which is a shame because I could sense that there was a true epic vision being built in Final Fantasy XV, it's just that that vision won't be seen to completion as intended. But with all that said, I do think Final Fantasy XV is a great game. There was a lot of passion, heart, and talent put into the product, and I think the game itself is a lot of fun. It's certainly one of my favorites in the series, it's one of my favorite games on the PS4, and I do recommend anyone watching this video to play it at least once. And with that, the video is over, and I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, this was a lot of fun to make. It was definitely a lot of content to put in one video, but hey, Final Fantasy XV, it's an interesting game to talk about, and well, I'm glad to finally talk about it after all this time. And I'm also very happy I will be able to shave after this video is done, so I'm looking forward to that. So leave me some comments, everybody. What's your favorite Final Fantasy game, and what did you think of Final Fantasy XV? Let me know down there in the comments. And while you're down there, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell as well for notifications on future videos. Hit me up on the social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at ZMangs, you know what it is, and I'll see you in the next video. Later, everybody. Take care.